Okay, Amy, you've opened the last two retrospectives with the same joke and then spent 15 minutes talking about tangentially related topics that aren't actually discussing the game you're doing a retrospective of. This time, just start talking about the actual game. This is a Control retrospective. Just start talking about Control. Just Control. Nothing else.
My name is Alan Wake. I'm a writer.
Alan Wake is a horror game that follows the titular character, a writer suffering from writer's block, who escapes to a cabin in a small town in the Pacific Northwest with his wife to get away, recharge his batteries, and hopefully start writing again. Things don't exactly go to plan. He wakes up one morning to find his wife missing and pages of a manuscript scattered around that he doesn't remember writing, one which seems to be coming true around him as he searches for his wife and fights off a dark presence. So, opening jokes aside, Alan Wake is a really good place to start talking about Control. It was the first game that Remedy Entertainment developed after two Max Payne games put them on the map, born of a 2006 partnership with Microsoft Game Studios, as they were called back then. Remedy released Alan Wake on Xbox 360 on May 14th, 2010 in Europe, and May 18th, 2010 in North America. But May 18th, 2010 also saw the release of another game, Red Dead Redemption. Despite a huge marketing push from Microsoft, there was simply no way a brand new IP could compete against a new Rockstar release. Alan Wake sold 145,000 copies in the US in its launch month. Red Dead Redemption sold 1.5 million. Remedy tried to get a sequel off the ground, a prototype for which they would eventually share with Polygon in 2015, but due to a lack of interest, the studio was forced to move on to a different project altogether, releasing Quantum Break for Xbox One in 2015, before parting ways with Microsoft to work on a brand new game codenamed P7, which would eventually be called Control, which was, really ironically, shared at the PlayStation E3 press conference in 2017.
The oldest house is a shifting place. There are rules and rituals. You can keep traveling deeper.
God, that reveal was just exceptional. I'm skirting over the details of the history of Alan Wake because, yes, eventually I will be doing a retrospective on Remedy's Twin Peaks and Stephen King-inspired fun time jaunt to the Pacific Northwest. While capturing footage of the game for use during this part of this video, I, kind of played the whole game. And I heard the multiple recommendations that I tackle an Alan Wake video. It won't be next, but it is coming. But why talk about Alan Wake at all in a video that's supposed to be about Control? Well, aside from the obvious connections between it and Remedy's latest game via in-game notes and references to the events of the former that suggest the two games took place in the same world, which only became more substantial with the release of the AWE DLC, which, yes, we'll talk about later on.
I'm sorry. My name is Alan Wake.
Alan Wake became a beloved cult classic, despite its poor launch sales. Thanks to people like me who bought the game at launch, loved it, and wouldn't shut up about it, a 2012 PC release kickstarted the game's sales. By May 2013, the series, which included a short downloadable spin-off called Alan Wake's American Nightmare, had sold over 3 million copies, a number which had risen to 4.5 million by March 2015. While these numbers couldn't financially secure a sequel, I imagine they were a good indication to Remedy that they were onto something after all. Everything that works in Control, and there's a lot that works really, really well in Control, can be traced back to Alan Wake. The weirdness of the setting and storytelling.
He took out his hip flask when he reached the page that described how he reached the page that made him take out his hip flask. It wasn't the booze that made his mind reel.
The horror backdrop.
Have a great day. Hope you come back soon. Welcome to the
Oh Dear Diner.
Good girl.
The world building. The endearing cast of characters.
What are the Christmas lights for?
Protection, man! Like garlic against vampires?
Vampires.
Brilliantly conceived collectibles.
But the price for such a legacy is steep indeed. In Night Springs. Tonight's episode, a quantum suicide.
The epic set pieces. And more are all things you're going to hear me gush about over the course of this video, and they all existed in Alan Wake. Even the combat, which strives to offer something different from its third-person action game contemporaries, although it kinda missed the mark a bit in Alan Wake. That, along with a few other features and gameplay mechanics, would take a little bit more iteration. To indulge in a metaphor for a moment, combat crawled in Alan Wake and walked in Quantum Break, so it could soar in Control. Sometimes literally. I could really dive into comparisons between Alan Wake and Control and discuss the various iterations, lessons, and improvements Remedy carried forward from one to the other. But I was only half joking in the intro to this video about not wanting to spend ages talking about things that aren't Control, and I have a future retrospective that I can use to unleash 11 years of pent-up fangirling over Alan Wake. Plus, it's definitely going to come up again in this video,
My name is Alan Wake.
so I'd say now would be a good time to move on.
There you are. You are here about the job. Janitor's assistant. You need to go to the interview.
I have a thing about really good game openings. I know that might sound like a redundant thing to say. Who doesn't like it when a game does something good that they enjoy? But like, a really, really solid opening or introduction to a game is a thing that I'm really into. Look, if I wasn't into weird minutiae like this, I probably wouldn't be on YouTube making hour-plus long retrospectives about video games. Plus, it probably goes hand in hand with one of my pet peeves in gaming. Boring, pointless tutorials. I mean, I guess it's good when a video game teaches you what all the buttons do or whatever, but in a world where Shigeru Miyamoto and the team at Nintendo figured out how to do an effortless tutorial in 1985 with World 1-1, something like Rocket Arena tutorial just feels unnecessarily overbearing to pick a totally random recent game out of the air. It was the first one that came to mind. World 1-1 in Super Mario Bros. Is set out in such a way that it subtly teaches you everything you need to know about how to play the game and how to tackle the many obstacles and enemies that lie on your path. I mean, sure, the game will throw new platforming challenges and different types of enemies at you as you progress through it, but you learn more or less everything you need to know in World 1-1. It's the best kind of tutorializing, the kind where you're not even consciously aware that the game is teaching you anything. You just think you're having a good time playing the game, you moron. But it's not just about tutorials. A really strong opening can set the tone for the entire rest of the game. Doom 2016, another game that has a legendary opening sequence, pulls the same trick of tutorializing without you really noticing. I think it pauses like once to tell you what glory kills are, but does an amazing job of setting the tone of the experience you're about to have. I mean, within 40 seconds of starting the game, you have a gun in your hand and you're killing demons. It would have been great if Doom Eternal had remembered why its predecessor was so great.
All the wickedness that mankind can produce Rip and tear until it is done.
Venus Prane.
If you can hear me, if you're out there.
Attempting to acquire the Hellpriest signal.
Nearly 60% of our planet has been consumed by the invaders.
Let me shoot demons already. God. Doom 2016 has Doom Guy ripping and tearing his way through the demonic invasion in progress within a few minutes, which sets the expectations that this will be an aggressive experience that's focused on the player slaughtering the legions of hell. Doom Guy even literally throws the opening plot exposition away, as if it's something he doesn't need, which is cool. Though it doesn't mean that Doom 2016 has bad storytelling you should ignore, just that it's not necessarily something you need to focus on. It's there if you want it, and if you choose to pay attention to it, Doom 2016 actually does convey its world building and storytelling in really interesting ways. Like, when you approach your first Gore Nest, you hear this.
Demonic presence at unsafe levels. Lockdown in effect.
Which implies that there's a safe level of demonic presence. I really should make that Doom 2016 retrospective one of these days. There are tons of amazing video game openings. They're all brilliant, and it succeeded doing a vast array of very different things. From Uncharted 2 to Final Fantasy VII, Mass Effect 2, Half-Life, Fahrenheit, Resident Evil 4, Silent Hill 2, The Last of Us. So many that all try and succeed massively to do so many different things that I might actually make a video just about video game openings. But I chose to focus on Doom 2016 in this video because that's what I'm reminded of as I rewatch and analyse the footage I have captured of Control's opening and think about the effect it had on me as I was playing it through. Control is trying to set a wildly different tone than that of Doom, but there are a lot of similarities in the approach. Let's recap the beginning of the game. Control starts with a monologue from protagonist Jesse Faden that sets out the core themes of the game before giving you control. You explore the seemingly abandoned entrance of the Federal Bureau of Control, find a friendly janitor who mistakes you as someone who's here to interview for the job as his assistant, head up the elevator, find the director of the Bureau dead in his office. You pick up his gun, are given a brief tutorial on what it is and how to use it, head out, encounter your first enemies, rescue some members of the Bureau, one of whom explains what's going on. You learn a little about why Jesse came to the Bureau in the first place, and you're given your first task. There's nothing too obviously weird in the opening. I mean, being transported to a different plane of existence to get a tutorial on how to use the weird new gun you picked up is strange, no doubt. But we've all played a ton of games that have contrived to transpose you to a tutorial area, so yeah, no big deal in the grand scheme of video gaming. Plus, I guess the people hanging suspended in the air, the dead bodies, and the attacks by what you'll come to call the Hiss aren't exactly business as usual for the Bureau. But if things were business as usual for the Bureau, you probably wouldn't have a game to play, am I right?
Oh, thanks, Freddy. Foreshadowing.
The first really obviously out-of-the-ordinary thing you encounter is on your way to the hotline chamber, which to reach you need to pull a light code 3 times to transport yourself to the Ocean View Motel, a liminal space that acts as a bridge between a place you are and a place you want to go, whilst also being an unknown motel somewhere in the world. But is it? Let's go back to the beginning again and take a slightly closer look at everything leading up to you getting your first mission from Emily Pop. Okay, so I normally construct my videos in a way where I don't need to put a spoiler warning quite so early, but before I analyse the opening in any great detail, I feel like I need to give one. If you're watching this video and you haven't played Control but you're definitely planning on doing so, you should bail now and come back when you've finished it. There aren't any major spoilers in the next few chapters, but part of the joy of playing Control is finding everything, even minor details, for yourself. And you don't want my dumb video ruining that joy for you. For anyone who's on the fence and needs some convincing or doesn't care about relatively minor spoilers, there'll be a full-on spoiler warning later. Okay, and go. So you remember walking along this balcony, around this corridor, and then bumping into Annie the janitor, right? This is the first place where a couple of weird things happen that not a lot of people consciously catch the first time they're playing, at least according to the conversations I've had with people who have played Control at least once. Artie is a pretty cool guy. He's my favourite character in the game, and he seems friendly enough even when you first meet him, even if he does mistake you as someone who's here to interview for the janitor's assistant job. But it's fine. He directs you to the elevator that takes you deeper into the Bureau, but wait a minute. This is the same balcony as when I entered, and that elevator definitely wasn't there before. and the doorway I walked in through has disappeared. In fact, the way the corridor looped around, there's no way this has led back to the same place. It's not physically possible. And wait, hold on. That conversation with Artie, did he respond to Jesse's inner monologue?
I've done enough night shift loner jobs to know it makes us come off weird. Artie the janitor is a friendly face in my book.
Better than somebody with no face at all. Think about it. No face.
Yeah, it turns out Control is messing with you from pretty much the outset. It's one of the things I absolutely love about the game, amongst a sea of other things I absolutely love about the game. When Jessie walks into the Federal Bureau of Control, she's stepping into a world that might look like the real world, but it's one which operates on its own set of rules and internal logic. And well before you pull a light switch code 3 times to transport yourself to a trans-dimensional motel that will grant you access to what is essentially a really fancy phone booth, the Bureau, the building you're in, and the game itself is very subtly inviting you into its weird and wonderful world. When the disembodied voice of the board speaks to you after you pick up the service weapon for the first time, their speech pattern is a fascinating combination of textbook corpo speak and those really annoying company form letters rolled into one. Their doublespeak is brilliantly ambiguous and incredibly revealing at the same time. I mean, that line is just genius. It's ambiguous enough that you're not really sure which way to take it, or if there's even a distinction, and it's direct enough that you completely understand it. That one line, and pretty much everything the board will ever say to you going forward, walks the incredibly fine line between being incomprehensible, pseudo-philosophical nonsense and completely plain and crystal clear, at the same time. You wield the gun, we wield you. Plus, it's just really weird, which is great. I like really weird. You also get to watch the first of many video presentations by the Bureau's head of research, Dr. Darling, my favourite character in the game, who explains a little about objects of power, objects that are... Wait, hold on.
Objects of power can cause or be results of AWE's altered world events, intrusions upon the perceived reality. A side note, remember to cover their connection to the astral plane as well. Now, the service weapon is, of course, a prime example of an OOP, a very powerful one. Ingrained in the Bureau's DNA, a key component in our prime candidate program. Come out of that Russian roulette a winner and you're it. Lose and you're, well, fired. Thank you. I'm Dr. Darling, head of research, Federal Bureau of Control.
Yeah, it turns out the service weapon, the gun you've just picked up, triggered the weirdest job interview of Jessie's life that elevated her to the position of Bureau Director. And, if you pay attention while exploring the first few offices after picking the gun up, you'll notice there are already portraits of Jessie on the wall. The deeper you delve into the Bureau, the weirder things get. You start to learn more about the effects of the Hiss, the name for the otherworldly force that has invaded the Bureau, encounter more people taken over by them, cleanse your first object of power, a floppy disk that fires debris at you and grants you the launch ability. You traverse the Ocean View Motel and arrive at the Hotline Chamber, a space that simply couldn't exist within the confines of a skyscraper in downtown New York City. Then you answer the phone to give you a direct line to the board and to Trench, the previous director of the Bureau whose corpse you stumbled upon a little bit earlier. From here, you'll see more altered items, tangle with more objects of power, learn about more altered world events, and find even stranger sectors of the Bureau, like the full-on power plant, or the quarry that's simultaneously underneath the power plant, but also has a wonderful view of the night sky above it, and it all makes sense. Well, I mean, it doesn't, but that's the point. It's the real world that Jessie was talking about in the inner monologue that opens the entire game. The one riffing on that one prison movie. What was it called again? Talking about the cell and the poster on the wall that hides the real world. But if you walk into this building with an open mind, everything will make sense. Everything is explained. That's the point of the entire Bureau, to bring a sense of mundanity to the paranormal. But now I'm starting to get ahead of myself.
Maybe you're seeing colors that we have no name for. Maybe your toaster is possessed. Remember, dear listeners, when no one else believes you, we do.
Control isn't just weird, it's new weird. It's one of the reasons why I used the word weird so many times in the previous chapter. Not to reinforce some sort of genre label, mind you, but because that's just the best way to describe pieces of fiction that fall under the new weird category. The truth is, new weird, despite the new part of the title, has been around for a while. It's a collision of the contemporary and the fantastic, of the mundane and the extraordinary. It's also a collision of traditional genres, elements of science fiction, fantasy, horror, all blended together in new and imaginative ways to create something completely removed from their inspirations, yet totally familiar at the same time. Like I said, this isn't exactly anything particularly new. Authors have been experimenting with and pushing the boundaries of genre since genre existed, from as far back as H.G. Wells and Jules Verne through Philip K. Dick, Harlan Ellison, through to today's writers of what we recognise as New Weird. New Weird as a genre or form of categorization really catalyzed in 2000 with the release of China Miéville's novel Perdido Street Station, which is an excellent book I read back in university that you should definitely get a hold of if you haven't. Thanks to its mainstream critical and commercial success, Perdido Street Station launched a genre that many have spent the intervening decades trying to define. And, perhaps fittingly for a genre whose staples include the smashing together of already existing genres and ideas, defies strict characterizations. Not that people haven't tried.
New weird, like most literary categories, is a moment, a suggestion, a tease, an intervention, an attitude, above all an argument. You cannot read off a checklist and say X is in, Y is out, and think you understand what's at stake or what's being argued.
New Weird is exercises in world building characterized by a heterogeneity of sources, genres, and details. It's particularly eclectic, mixing modern street culture with ancient mythology.
The genre is a type of urban secondary world fiction that subverts the romanticized ideas about places found in traditional fantasy, largely by choosing realistic, complex, real-world models as the jumping-off point for the creation of settings that may combine elements of both science fiction and fantasy.
Perhaps maddeningly for anyone who might want to try and organize things into neat categories, New Weird defies strict genre restrictions. It's the kind of thing you know when you see it. You watch a movie like Annihilation on Netflix, with its fantastical otherworld literally colliding with our own, and follow Natalie Portman and a team of badasses as they explore this new frontier of strange and weird and wonderful and terrifying things, and you just know. This is New Weird. And a really cool movie too. My favourite attempt at decoding New Weird comes from a Guardian blog post from 2008. For serious writers of speculative fiction, the prize has always been the belief that the unrealities of science fiction, fantasy, and horror provide unique tools with which to dissect the realities of our world. Those tools have been so successful that the language of speculative fiction has become one of the most powerful forces in contemporary culture. If the New Weird writers represent a turning point, it is because they are the first generation of writers to grow up completely immersed in the culture of sci-fi. For such writers, the language of speculative fiction is the first and preferred means of expression because it is the only way to describe a real world permeated on every level with unreality, fantasy, and fiction. A real world permeated on every level with unreality, fantasy, and fiction? Well, that sounds like your average Tuesday inside the Federal Bureau of Control.
I want to be a part of this world. What scares me shitless is that I finally found it.
It's impossible to talk about Control in any sort of depth without discussing in detail the oldest house. While players might control the movements and actions of Jesse Faden, it's the oldest house itself that feels like the game's primary protagonist. And antagonist. Control has a narrative that certainly drives the action forward. Jesse has come to the Bureau via the guidance of an enigmatic paranormal entity that communicates with her, searching for her brother Dylan, who was taken to the FBC after an incident in their childhood. But the inciting incident of this narrative, Jesse setting foot inside the oldest house for the first time and becoming the Bureau's new director, is merely a means of opening a door into a whole new world. Or as Jesse puts it in the opening, ripping down the poster on the wall of her cell and climbing through the hole behind.
Everything here is crazy. Weird, but it feels right. Like how the world should be. I am in an infinite building leading to different dimensions, and I never want to leave. Even with all the horror, I'm happy. It feels sane. Just the right kind of insane.
Yeah, I'm with Jesse on this one. This place rules. The oldest house is... Wait, hold on.
August 4th, 1964. We discovered the oldest house while investigating a suspected altered world event case in the New York City subway tunnels. The agents found their way up into the building. Once we became aware of it, it was there. For the rest of the population, it was hiding in plain sight, a slippery blind spot, seemingly discouraging observation. It's a place of power, an ongoing AWE of its own, seemingly adhering to its physical outer constraints and yet constantly breaking the known boundaries of reality. It's unstable, shifting. Note, for more details on control points and the research and process to stabilize and secure the core sectors, refer to a separate presentation. After extensive research and investigation, the Bureau made the building its headquarters on November 13th, 1968. The Federal Bureau of Control was never out in the open. This was always an obfuscated, classified top-secret operation. So imagine our surprise when the building's observation-resistant aspects began in some unquantifiable way to affect the Bureau as a whole.
For almost 55 years, the oldest house has acted as the headquarters for the FBC. This is where they launch all their missions, where they contain and study the paranatural objects and people they find, and it's the place you're going to spend your entire time with the game exploring. The building itself is the perfect setting for Control. Not just because it's actively trying to screw around with you thanks to its constantly shifting corridors, impossible to exist spaces, and connections to other places, but because of its very design. The oldest house is based on a real building on 33 Thomas Street, allegedly home in the real world to a National Security Agency surveillance post. The real-world skyscraper, and by extension the in-game one that inspired it, was born from a mid-20th century architectural style known as brutalist architecture, which became popular in the 1960s and is characterized by architectural designs using rigid geometry, monolithic blocky appearances, monochrome color palettes, and a shit ton of poured concrete. At the time, brutalism was most commonly used when designing and constructing government buildings, hospitals, universities, car parks, low-cost blocks of flats, and more. While the results of this aesthetic can be seen all over the world, its use was most widespread throughout the Soviet Union countries at the time. Brutalism fell out of favour in the 1970s, being criticised for feeling inhuman and unwelcoming, which... yeah, I get that. In a 2009 article in the Clay Journal, British author, physician, and psychiatrist Anthony Daniels described brutalist structures as an artifact of philosophical totalitarianism, called the buildings a spiritual, intellectual, and moral deformity, and using words like cold-hearted, inhuman, and monstrous. All of this just makes brutalism the perfect backdrop for the oldest house in the Federal Bureau of Control. For starters, it makes perfect sense that a government operation would be housed inside a building designed using brutalist aesthetics. From the moment you enter it, the oldest house feels oppressive, not because of an invasion by an otherworldly force, but simply by the way the building itself looks and feels. The oldest house feels cold-hearted, it feels inhuman, it feels blocky and drab and lacking in colour. It's not a place anyone would particularly want to be. Losing your way is a big part of Control's exploration. It's off the beaten path where you'll find huge chunks of really interesting parts of the game. And it's not just this terrible by design map that will help you get lost, it's the architecture. And there's something quite genius about combining the retro technology employed by the Bureau, because introducing smart technology to the oldest house almost immediately highlighted as a terrible idea in an early note, and the brutalism that was widely popular in the mid-20th century. It feels old-fashioned, out of place, just a little bit off, which is exactly the kind of feeling that Control is trying to evoke at almost every turn. And it plays into the mundanity that Remedy is trying to communicate throughout the game. The player, through the eyes of Jesse, is stepping into this building and into this world for the first time, filled with mysteries and wonders and horrors and beauty. And it could be easy to think this is simultaneously the coolest and most subtly terrifying place on Earth. But for the people who aren't having a stressful first day, it's just their job. And Control goes out of its way to paint over the weird and wonderful things you find inside with a layer of mundanity. The objects of power, the thresholds, the Ocean View Motel, all of this sounds and is really abnormal, but for the people who work for the FBC, it's just a part of their day jobs. And Control does a really great job of communicating this by designing the building to resemble a standard everyday workspace, when it's not giving way to gigantic power plants or quarries, and via its correspondence and memos between its employees, which I'll get to shortly. Hiss invasion aside, this is as much a normal part of their lives as your job is to you. I mean, don't get me wrong, some of them really love their jobs, like Dr. Darling's assistant, Emily Pope, my favourite character in the game.
What's the plan for all that Blackrock?
The Bureau has used Blackrock almost exclusively for containment purposes. See, I say, branch out. Instead of boxes, helmets. Instead of blast shields, knives.
Knives?
Yes, knives! So many combat applications. Slicing, stabbing, gouging. Sorry. I've been trying to get Darling to explore combat applications for years. I got a little excited.
In Control, Remedy has done the best thing it could possibly have done with a fictional world in which a government agency studies, examines, and responds to paranormal events that happen all over the world. They've normalized it, and created a central bureaucracy around it. The Bureau has divided the oldest house into sectors, each with their own departments and their own purposes within the massive hulking bureaucracy of the FBC. You've got the executive sector, which serves as the central hub for the Bureau, housing things like the Director's Office, Boardroom, and Communications Department. Containment is where the Bureau's security is focused and includes the Panopticon, a massive prison that houses dangerous objects of power and altered items, which are different from objects of power because... Actually, hold up a sec.
We find them in the aftermath of altered world events. They take the form of everyday objects, ever present in our lives, constantly evoked in the thoughts of millions of people, now infused with unpredictable energies. They're altered. The superstitious would call them cursed. Now, are altered items sentient? Not quite. They're often fixated, programmed almost to cause certain events to happen over and over again. While generally less potent than objects of power, they are not able to be controlled. Left unchecked, they can be highly dangerous. To study altered items, we contain them in Panopticon.
Wow, it's really handy having these Dr. Darling presentations to refer back to when I need to explain stuff that's in the game. It helps that they're both informative and fun.
The Panopticon container cells.
Sorry to interrupt, sir, but I need the code for the quarry elevator.
Oh, Emily. The codes. Blackrock 665. Neighbor of the Beast. Get it?
The research sector is, as you might imagine, full of different departments tasked with studying the wide variety of paranatural phenomena encountered by the Bureau. And there's also an investigations department, which we'll get to later.
My name is
Lastly, there's the maintenance sector, which is mostly focused around the janitorial department and delivering power to the Bureau, albeit via a massive power plant that definitely shouldn't be able to exist inside a Manhattan skyscraper. And, the quarry? I'm sorry, I have to talk about the implications of there being a quarry with an admittedly beautiful night sky hanging above it near the bottom of the oldest house. It's a threshold, one of several you'll encounter throughout the game, which is a place where the oldest house is connected to somewhere else. But, like, space is up there. I'm assuming that the quarry is on another planet somewhere in the cosmos. It definitely doesn't look like anywhere on Earth. So, like, could the Bureau build a spaceship inside the quarry threshold and use it to explore the universe? And if so, could they theoretically, like, find Earth and the Bureau, which is connected to the quarry via the maintenance sector? Like some kind of Russian nesting doll?
This is wrinkling my brain.
These are the kinds of questions that Control has you asking. Things like, what's with all these clocks? Has this guy really been staring at a fridge for the last 24 hours? Oh cool, the roulette table. I wonder what I can get for spinning it. This is why I mentioned earlier that while the opening chapters of this video wouldn't contain any major plot spoilers, you should still be wary about watching them if you haven't played the game and had any inclination to do so. The plot is cool and it drives the narrative and Jesse herself to explore, but what makes Control such a brilliant game is what you can find as you explore the oldest house. The overarching narrative, while important, kind of plays second fiddle to the world that Remedy has created. And make no mistake, this is a masterclass in world building.
I wonder how often the phrase mad scientist is used around here.
So one thing I did when I was replaying Control on PlayStation 5 for this video was something I've almost never done. In fact, looking at my PlayStation profile, I've only done it twice before. I got the Platinum Trophy. I'm not a trophy or achievement hunter when I play video games. Like, seriously, ask my friends. The few times I've gone out of my way to try and get a Platinum or 100% achievements, it's almost driven me mad. I didn't need to get the Platinum to make this video, though I do have it, so it's literally illegal to disagree with anything I say. I got the Platinum thanks to my joy, my burning desire, my need to explore everything in the oldest house, to find all of the objects of power, altered items, thresholds, files, people, places. I wanted to see it all. Not to unlock a few trophies or to claim bragging rights or to make it illegal for you to disagree with me about Control. I did it because I wanted to. And for me, that's a hell of a rarity in a video game. And what's absurd is, I still want more. If Control had been twice as long, or if finishing the campaign had unlocked another 6 sectors filled with just as many quests and just as much lore to unlock, I would have gladly sunk another 25 hours into the game to explore all of it. With the FBC in the oldest house, Remedy has done such an amazing job creating a world I want to know as much as possible about, that I could happily keep exploring it for dozens upon dozens upon dozens more hours. In 2019, shortly after I finished Control and did an impressions video of it, I sat down and wrote an essay titled, How Control Made Me Realize Why I Kinda Hate Open World Games. A lot of the things I'm going to talk about in this chapter of the video are going to apply here, which is great for me because I feel like I've already written this part of the retrospective. But if you've already seen that video, some of this might seem familiar. Don't worry, this isn't a copy-paste job. I've got 1,500 words worth of notes I'm working from in this Google Doc. Over the past couple of years, I've spoken a lot on podcasts about my growing annoyance at open-world game design. That's not to say there haven't been open-world games I've really enjoyed. Like, does the Outer Worlds count? Well, I guess there was Miles Morales. That was alright. And Yakuza Like a Dragon has an open city? So there's been a couple. Sort of. I've had a bit of a personal beef with open world game design for a while now. A lot of open world games over the past few years have all started to bleed together in my mind. Their design has become, in my opinion, incredibly homogenized. They all feature so many similarities that I'd need a whole other video essay to really talk about them. But for the purpose of this chapter of my Control retrospective, I want to focus on 2 aspects of the design: the collectibles and the side quests. Control isn't an open world game. The oldest house is made up of a series of hub-like levels that are connected via corridors and rooms, each with their own very specific purposes. The first time you pass through any given area, usually on your way to complete whatever main mission you're tasked with at that moment, they're also fairly linear. It's only when you revisit areas after unlocking new abilities or a new clearance level that can unlock previously locked doors, or when doing some of the side quests, that you'll, for the most part, even start exploring areas that aren't on the critical mission path. And sure, not all of the side quests are winners. There's one repeating side quest you'll get from Artie's janitorial board that tasks you with clearing out some mold. It's exactly as exciting as it sounds, even if the mold is extra-dimensional in origin and you have to gun instead of a bucket of white vinegar and a sponge. But this is also a game where you'll find a locked door you couldn't open before, unlock it, and find an office overrun with post-it notes. Alright, so it's not the most groundbreaking thing you can find in a video game, or even in the oldest house. But it's pretty funny. A paranatural post-it note took over some poor executive's office, and they had to abandon it. It's these details, both big and small, that make the world Remedy has created such an interesting and compelling place to just poke around in. Wandering around an open world and finding 53 feathers or 49 shrines or whatever might net you a trophy or achievement, that's just boring busy work. Yes, I know some of those ridiculous amounts of collectibles will unlock cosmetic items for your character or some kind of gameplay bonus or buff, but those are actually worse. I have to go out of my way 49 times to unlock some minor upgrades for my character? Are the diversions at least interesting in their own right? No? Then what's the friggin' point of them? Okay, I know I'm bagging on one specific unnamed game there, but playing Control in 2019 when my open world fatigue was really just starting to kick in, and again in 2021 when it's fully settled into the guest room in my brain, it puts these things in perspective. Instead of side quests that feel meaningless in the larger context of the game, you're giving glimpses into different parts of the game's lore, usually in really interesting ways. Sure, not all of the side quests are winners, they never are, but I still think about Fridge Duty, the side quest that begins when you come across the unfortunate employee stuck watching a fridge, and more specifically everything that follows on from that moment. Or tracking down escaped altered items that all behave in unique and interesting ways, and are genuinely interesting to find out about, and occasionally, really unsettling. Most every witness saw numerous mannequins break the house's windows, tumbling outside. Some witnesses report bright lights, some report high-pitched singing, these are unverified. Numerous civilians inside the house at the time of the incident were hospitalized for various injuries. 2 were crushed to death. Oh no. This is also what makes Control's collectibles so vital to the experience. Rather than throwaway trinkets designed to give you something to do with little to no reward. In Control, the collectibles are the memos, documents, and audio and video logs that describe the various altered items and altered world events that the Bureau's come into contact with. Instead of feeling like filler content, Control's collectibles are something I gladly sought out and consumed, because they offered me just another glimpse into the new world I'd stepped into. And also because some of them are about Alan Wake, and I yearn deeply for any new information about Alan Wake. This stands in stark contrast to the open worlds that are becoming more common in games. I played Control at a time when I was feeling incredibly burned out on them. The vast majority of open world games I've played recently have left me feeling fatigued with how they work, how they're set up, and the hoops they expect you to jump through just to reach some meaningful content. Control isn't an open world, not really, but playing it helped solidify in my mind why open world games have left me feeling so disinterested. These are huge, massive worlds, and yet a lot of the time they feel so empty. Worlds where collectibles are merely trinkets or doodads that are practically meaningless, designed purely for the sake of having something in a location for players to collect, rather than existing to enhance your experience within the world. Dozens or even hundreds of things to divert you from the critical mission path, just to give players another distraction or another checklist of content to work through. Gigantic worlds more and more feel like they exist purely for publishers to boast about how big their maps are, with little to no thought put into how those maps are designed or any meaningful content that could possibly be put into them. Sometimes you do get cool stuff out of them. Ability points to power your awesome abilities, for example. If you manage to not kill yourself at the roulette table and solve the puzzle, you get this really dope golden suit that Jesse can wear. But the reward is in playing the side quest, or finding the collectibles themselves. The Synchronicity side quest sees you heading to a department that exists to study a really creepy mirror, which I was happy to do even if there had been no reward for completing it. Or the FBC warning, what to do if you ever find yourself standing next to a window. Every note, memo, correspondence, audio log, Dr. Darling presentation, it all contributes to just excellent world building. And it's just really rewarding to find for the sake of it. And that's something really special. It makes Control feel expansive, like there's a whole world that exists independently of the player. There are so many games that feel like they cease to function when the player isn't around. Control feels like its world has existed long before you ever got there, will continue to exist long after you stop playing, and has so much more going on than you'll ever see. Luckily, you get to glimpse bits and pieces of it thanks to the countless collectibles you find scattered throughout the game. It also makes every part of the oldest house feel like it has a purpose, which makes you want to explore every nook and cranny you can find. The Control Platinum was the first time I've never had to go very far out of my way to unlock trophies or achievements in a video game, because I was so compelled by the game itself to track down pretty much everything I needed to unlock its trophies anyway. I almost more or less got the Platinum trophy on accident. I mean, the constant crisis alerts were kind of annoying.
Crisis alert! Crisis alert! Crisis alert! Crisis alert!
They would constantly pop up at the most inconvenient times, usually when I was in the middle of a mission, and going back to do them would require undoing a bunch of progress, and they always cleared if you didn't activate them immediately. That's like the most minor of minor annoyances, and it was more than made up for by the single greatest collectible I can remember in a game in the past decade, maybe even more. You know what? It's so cool, it's gonna get its own mini chapter.
TV! Let's watch Donkeys in Space!
It's not safe.
But Star Captain here! Can I poke it with a stick?
Okay. Bureau rule number 74. Always be suspicious of things that weren't there before.
What?
This is the greatest thing ever, and whoever came up with the Threshold Kids deserves a raise, a bigger office, a promotion, awards. Like, there's like all of the awards. Like, there's the Game Awards, BAFTAs, Oscars. They're doing game things, right? I don't know. They just like, they deserve the world. That's it. That's the chapter. I haven't even written a script for this part. The Threshold Kids are genuinely like the coolest things you can find in a video game. So yeah, I'm done. We can move on to the next chapter now.
I wanted to talk to you about the crazy things I can do. My abilities. I get the sense that they're not very usual around here.
Well, I spent the opening chapter talking about the various ways you can trace Control back to Alan Wake. The one massive improvement Control made amongst the thousands of smaller refinements was to the core gameplay and combat. I've talked a lot so far about how, with the oldest house, Remedy created a world that it's easy to get immersed in, a world that feels grounded in reality, albeit a very different reality to our own, filled with creepy kids' puppet shows and paranatural objects, and exploding roulette wheels. But there's one aspect of the world I didn't touch on in previous chapters, and that's breaking literally everything. In Control, physics is fun. Like, really fun, and super satisfying. The level of environmental destruction in fights is incredibly impressive and absurdly satisfying. When a battle erupts between you and whatever hiss enemies you've just encountered, You can just make the biggest mess of everything around you thanks to whatever magic remedy used in place of a more traditional physics system. Everything you can see in any given room in the oldest house is an individual object with its own physics that will behave accordingly if it's interacted with by a character, a gunshot, a flying piece of concrete, an explosion, or basically any physical interaction you can think of. What this means is that all of the objects in control behave independently from one another. Shoot a desk, for example, and every item on that desk, the paperwork, the files, the folders, the computer, the monitor, the stapler, the pens and pencils, the desk itself, all behave in a fairly realistic manner. Multiply that by a room full of desks, overflowing with the typical clutter you find in any office, and throw in a pitched battle between a paranaturally empowered superhero of a main character armed with a gun and telekinetically ripping chunks out of the scenery or tossing anything that isn't nailed down, which is literally everything around her, and enemies blasting away at you with their own guns, firing rockets and lobbing grenades, and even the most mundane pedestrian fights in the most random hallway or room in the oldest house becomes incredibly immersive and visually stunning. Filing cabinets explode in a shower of paper, fire extinguishers detonate in a shower of carbon dioxide and white mist, explosives leave craters in the floor and walls, sending concrete rubble flying in all directions. Wooden desks will chip and splinter depending on how much destructive force they're being met with. Glass windows will shatter and break apart realistically. It's magic. I think whoever designed the underlying physics engine and environments might actually be wizards and witches. It caused some issues when the game first came out on base consoles, but now that's all been fixed up, and the game has been re-released on next-gen consoles. The result is magnificent. The world of Control is so deeply satisfying to interact with because it reacts to everything you do in such a spectacular manner. And speaking of deeply satisfying, let's talk about those paranatural powers I just mentioned. As the newly minted director of the FBC, with the assistance of Polaris, who we'll talk about shortly, Jesse can cleanse the objects of power that are taking advantage of the chaos caused by the Hiss invasion and are running rampant throughout the oldest house. Some of these OOPs bestow Jesse with new abilities. They're all pretty cool. The X-ray light box that gives you Mesmerize, letting you seize control of your enemies, the Benikoff TV that grants you the Levitate ability, the Home Safe that lets Jessie create a shield in front of her by gathering up debris from around her. And incidentally, if you read the case file, is an awesomely messed up object of power.
Discovered in the basement of a home in Ohio, the object gained rapid interest in certain online forums dedicated to opening abandoned safes. After months of failure, the owner attempted to open it with explosives. The object survived with no physical damage. Bureau agents were dispatched, now confident of its paranatural nature. Blood occasionally emerges from seams around the object's door. Tests confirm the blood is not human. X-rays taken of the object indicate that something is trapped inside, though the images are always blurred, which indicates the contents of the object are moving. All attempts to open the object have been unsuccessful.
Yeah, how cool, I mean awful is that?
Very cool, I mean awful.
I fucking love this game. Like, seriously, the writers who came up with all the backstories and lore must have just been having the best time, just letting their imaginations run wild with this stuff. Anyway, I could list and talk about all of the different powers Jessie receives from the various objects of power she cleanses, because they're all brilliant, but let's just cut straight to the one I really want to focus on. Launch. Combined with the level of environmental destruction and the fast-paced combat that forces you to stay constantly on the move, Launch is one of the most satisfying combat abilities in an action game of the past 10 years. Or 20 years. Hell, maybe ever? Launch is the first ability you unlock in the first chapter of the game, except I guess the ability to use the service weapon, but semantics. Launch basically gives you telekinetic powers, allowing Jessie to lift any small or medium-sized objects he's looking at with the power of her mind and then forcefully hurl it at her enemies. If there aren't any objects nearby, she'll just rip a chunk out of the ground or wall or nearby concrete pillar and throw that instead. Upgrading Launch will increase the amount of damage an object does on impact, but you can also unlock some really cool augmentations for the ability, eventually allowing Jessie to catch rockets and grenades, launch enemies themselves, grab bigger objects and throw them for massive damage, and eventually pick up a maximum of 3 objects at once and launch them at different targets, or all at the same target. There's one other incredibly cool feature of Launch. When Jessie picks up an object, she pulls it towards herself, eventually holding it in midair just above her shoulder, allowing you to effectively carry it around until you're ready to slam it into someone's face. But if you release the object early, before Jessie's finished pulling it towards herself, you'll still launch it, allowing you to fire objects at enemies from various angles, catching multiple enemies, or allowing you to throw objects from more advantageous positions, all with the power of science.
Yes, science!
In doing this retrospective, I played Control for about 25 hours. When the game first launched in 2019, I probably put around the same amount of time into it, returning for another few hours at some point in 2020 to play the DLCs when they both came out. So in total, I've probably put somewhere in the region of 55 to 60 hours into the game in the past year and a half, and the novelty of Jessie's launch ability still hasn't worn off. The combat in general is excellent. It's slick, fast-paced, and exciting. You can unlock new forms for the service weapon and switch between them on the fly to turn it into a pistol, a shotgun, a submachine gun, and more. Jessie's other abilities, evade, seize, shield, levitate, and ground slam, they're all pretty satisfying to use, especially when you start combining them in a furious exhibition of destruction. But launch is my go-to ability. I probably use it more than using the gun to kill enemies, and it feels just as satisfying 60 hours later than it did when I first started using it. I would generally put it on a par with the most enjoyable combat mechanics I can think of from other action games. Throwing Kratos' axe in God of War, the super shotgun in Doom, parrying in Bloodborne. Through a combination of the physics engine, the level of environmental destruction, the reactiveness of the world itself, and just how much fun it is to slam a piece of concrete into some dude's head with the power of your mind, launch is genuinely fantastic. At all times. No matter the situation you're in or whatever enemy you're fighting. Except maybe this Tomasi fight. I remember this fight from playing on Xbox a year and a half ago. It's such a screwy difficulty spike, even if you've got a ton of upgrades, and I don't know if I can be bothered with it. Hold on a minute. Oh, that was satisfying. So yeah, Control can be a pretty tough game at times. Like in this fight against the FBC's former head of communications turned pretty tough optional boss fight. The game doesn't have any traditional difficulty settings. In fact, at launch, it didn't have any difficulty settings at all. But when Remedy released the AWA expansion for the game, they also included Assist mode to help out players that might be struggling, or let players who might otherwise be super into the game's world and lore, but turned off by the action gameplay, which is impeccable, but might not be for everyone, options to tailor the experience however they like. I'm a big fan of highly customizable difficulty options. Easy, medium, and hard are fine enough, but I'm always here for an array of sliders and toggles that let you tailor a game's level of challenge to suit your own tastes. Or let me shoot Tomasi once in the face for a quick hit of catharsis. There are sliders in assist mode that let you incrementally increase your damage reduction, energy recovery, and ammo recovery. You can also toggle aim assist and aim snapping, or simply turn on options that let you kill everything in one hit or make Jessie immortal. Now, I used the one-hit kills option against Tomasi to grab a clip that let me segue into talking about difficulty, and because the Tomasi boss fight is really annoying and I didn't want to do it. Under ordinary circumstances, assist mode isn't something I'd use, but I love the fact that options like this exist in any game. We all experience difficulty and challenge differently for a variety of reasons, and any game that recognizes and acknowledges this and gives players the tools to create the kind of experience they want gets a thumbs up from me. Plus, sometimes it's just fun to let rip with a pseudo god mode and spend a couple of minutes blasting Hiss with an overpowered gun. Okay, we've reached that part of the video. You know the part. It's the part where I pause before starting a new chapter and give the big spoiler warning. I know I gave a minor one earlier, but I'm about to start talking about the main character, her backstory, the narrative in general, and go into quite a bit of detail specifically about the ending. If you haven't played Control and have any inclination towards changing that, the rest of this video really isn't for you, but it'll be here waiting for you when you're done. I hope you have a great time with one of my favourite games of the last decade. We're going to get into talking about Jessie, Dylan, and Polaris in depth in a few minutes, but first, let's talk about one of the greatest pieces of level design in recent memory.
Take control. Take control.
Honestly, I kind of want to pull the same trick here that I did in my Threshold Kids chapter, and just leave this part of the video unscripted and gush over how genuinely incredible the Ashtray Maze is. But there's actually specific things I want to say about it, and if I don't have those things written down in front of me, I'll forget like half of them. Just ask Moody. I've done it so many times on any episode of the weekly review where I don't have my notebook in front of me. I made a joke earlier in this video that the people who made this game must be wizards, witches, or whatever magically endowed descriptor they might prefer, because there are parts of this game that are just so good they couldn't possibly have been created by mere mortals. And the Ashtray Maze is probably the apex of this. It's a late game section of Control that stands between Jessie and one of her last objectives, getting to Polaris and saving her from the Hiss. It's an object of power, safeguarding the Dimensional Research Department and the Slide Projector, a labyrinth of shifting corridors that prevents anyone from reaching the other side, causing them to either become hopelessly and endlessly lost within, or spat back out where they entered. Only the person who the maze is bound to, and those they designate, can pass through. In this case, the Bureau's former and very deceased director, Trench. To get through the maze, you need to catch up with Artie, who is left to go on vacation because he's definitely no ordinary janitor. He gives you his cassette player. Apparently listening to whatever is on it gets him through the maze, a fact highlighted quite hilariously by a memo you find on the other side. What's on the tape? Just one kick-ass song by the old gods of Asgard. Listening to the song allows Jessie to traverse the maze and continue on a journey. The Ashtray Maze is... how do I put this in a way that gets my point across without overstaying it? The Ashtray Maze is one of the best pieces of level design I've ever played in a video game ever. Yeah, nailed it. It's a masterclass, a genuine feat of game design, and a perfect fusion of gameplay, level design, music, imagination, creativity, and sheer profound brilliance. It's not even the first time Remedy has done something like this. Like, the trippy, otherworldly design of the maze that shifts and contorts around Jessie as you make your way from one end to the other is, on its own, tremendous. The way the architecture gives way and changes around you could have made for a delightful level all by itself. But then you throw in the exceptional combat mechanics, which I discussed at length earlier, and a brilliant piece of music that somehow seems to fit whatever is happening around you, no matter how quickly or slowly you're making your way through the level. A song which, by the way, if you actually listen to the lyrics, is incredibly pertinent to the plot of the game. And my fucking god, you've got like the best 5 minutes in gaming. Period. The Ashtray Maze is genuinely incredible. I don't think I could ever talk enough about how incredible it is, but I don't want this video to run on forever, so I'll cut said endless praise off there. Just know that somewhere in an alternate reality, I've probably caused an altered world event all by myself trying to gush about the Ashtray Maze infinitely during the making of this video. I'll just let Jessie herself provide the summary.
That was awesome.
This is an ordinary song about an ordinary girl from an ordinary town. It's the ordinary story.
At the beginning of Control, Jessie Faden, my favourite character in the game, has arrived at the Federal Bureau of Control looking for her brother, Dylan. Years earlier, they both found a particularly powerful object of power in their hometown of Ordinary in the form of a slide projector, and when the FBC came to contain the OOP, they took Dylan back with them, but Jessie was able to escape and evade the agents. Jessie then dedicated herself to finding the Bureau and her brother with the help of Polaris, an entity the siblings encountered when they were using the slide projector, which communicates with Jessie and somehow became a part of her. The premise and setup is fairly standard. Shadowy government organisation has Jessie's brother and she wants to get him back. Obviously this is Control, so it becomes less standard fairly rapidly. As Jessie attempts to adjust to her role as the FBC's new director and fight back against the Hiss invasion, we the players slowly learn more and more about what transpired in Ordinary, and Jessie learns what the Bureau did with the slide projector, her brother Dylan, and, well, her after the incident. Considering this is a game that features, at its heart, a shadowy government agency that deals primarily in trying to solve mysteries, it feels right that Jessie herself is such a mystery when you first meet her. By the end of the first chapter, you know very little about her besides the broad stroke. You can glean a lot about her personality from the way she talks, the way she moves, and her inner monologue. For example, one of my favourite things about Jessie is how she takes everything in stride. Given that, within the space of her first hour inside the FBC, she's appointed the Bureau's director because she picked up a gun that was lying next to a dead body, met a mind-reading janitor, and is seemingly having an internal conversation with the player, which is actually Polaris, a seemingly benevolent entity she met when she was a child, though Polaris could still be an in-game stand-in for the player, more on that momentarily. Look, I could spend the next 20 to 30 minutes doing a deep-diving analysis into what it all meant, asking the questions that linger after the credits have rolled and the hiss have largely been taken care of. But one of the great things about Control is that it's really obvious with its themes, yet really vague in its specifics. I could theorycraft and give my interpretations of what happened and why, discuss the meaning behind everything related to the plot and the main characters. But the truth is, my thoughts, theories, and ideas are constantly changing whenever I think about the events of the game or go back to play it, like I did for this retrospective. The chances are that a month after I finally hit publish on this video, I'll have a whole set of new ideas and thoughts, and render many of the theories I put forward here completely meaningless, and they'll gnaw away at the back of my mind, sitting here in this video for all eternity and taunting me. Instead of focusing on the what and trying to put forward my theories on what actually happened, I want to focus on the why. Why, in my opinion, this all works as well as it does. A big part of the why is Jessie herself. Through a combination of stellar writing, excellent character animation, and a frankly brilliant performance by Courtney Horb, Jessie is a fantastic protagonist. She enters the oldest house a mystery. You're given the broadest of broad strokes about why she's there, but it takes most of the game to truly unravel Jessie as a person. But despite this, you immediately root for her. She's awkward, she's a bit of a dork, she's desperate, and she's vulnerable. These are all facets of her character that shine through organically. At no point does she monologue about her vulnerability or desperation. Through a combination of her inner monologues, character interactions, and decision-making, you learn about the character naturally, which again is all credit to the writing and pitch-perfect vocal performance. Jessie is essentially a superhero, but constantly dealing with her own self-doubt, grappling with her flaws as she rushes headfirst into whatever bizarre situation her new role as the director of the FBC requires of her next. It's quite a feat that Remedy created such a compelling character who is both incredibly self-assured in her actions and yet constantly doubting her own abilities and motivations, and that conflict sets up an excellent character arc for Jessie that, crucially, isn't fully resolved once the narrative is over. Jessie grows into her role of director, yes, but those doubts still exist, and probably always will. But it's those doubts that make her human, and incredibly relatable as a protagonist. About halfway through the game, she also mentions during one of her inner monologues that she feels like she truly belongs at the FBC. Like she's where she's always meant to be, which is interesting considering how Control ends. The first time. The fake first time. If you've played the game, you'll know what I mean. Dr. Darling and the FBC brought Polaris, who they named Hedron, but who I'll keep calling Polaris, thanks very much, back to the Bureau, and Jessie rushes to save her from the hiss. But she's too late. Polaris dies, and the hiss overwhelms Jessie, as it has done to the countless unfortunate souls of the FBC. The game, quote-unquote, ends with Jessie suffering the same fate as so many others. The hiss is taken over. Roll credits. Well, extremely fake credits that fall apart long before they reach their end. The next chapter of the game starts with Jessie trapped in a safe space within her own mind, the hiss right outside. Here, she's an office assistant whose job is to deliver mail, tidy coffee cups, and make photocopies. For anyone who gets this far, this might sound a little too familiar. When interrogating Dylan earlier in the game, who willingly let the hiss take over his mind, you discuss the various dreams he's been having. And one of these dreams is eerily similar to the scenario playing out in Jessie's mind during the opening parts of Control's final chapter.
You were an office assistant. You'd make coffee and deliver the mail, and there was always plenty of work to do. And it stayed that way, forever and ever. It was nice. Really nice.
That's debatable.
But is this taking place in Jesse's mind? Or is this Jesse's real life, and the events of Control are an elaborate daydream by an office assistant who is incredibly dissatisfied with her job and mocked by her co-workers who think she's bad at it? And that's the great thing about Control. It's really ambiguous. I don't really believe the latter theory personally, but it's entirely feasible and certainly possible. Thanks to the excellent lore scattered throughout the game, Remedy have created a world of near infinite possibility. The ambiguity of moments like this don't stem from a lack of clarity or information. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's not a lack of answers that fuels the mysteries that persist beyond the game's credits. It's the realization that anything really is possible in the world of Control. Was Polaris a benevolent entity, a selfish one, or maybe even an aspect of the Hiss that was changed by her encounter with Jesse all those years ago in Ordinary? Did Polaris, as Jesse thought of her, even exist? Or was she something that always existed inside Jesse, that just happened to be awoken by her experiences with the slide projector when she was younger? Does Jesse have any real agency in her life, or is she just as trapped in a prison as her brother was all those years? These are questions that have multiple potential answers, and Control goes out of its way to make sure that they're all possible. The result is a game whose world and events linger in your mind many months and even years after you've finished the game. Despite a 15-ish hour story and a multitude of side quests, the ability to interrogate characters for information, and literally hundreds of notes and memos explaining a ton about the FBC, so much of the game continues to be shrouded in mystery long after the real credits have rolled. Whenever I think about Control, my mind races with possibilities. And hey, maybe we'll get some more concrete answers to some of these questions in whatever comes next from Remedy and the world they've built here. Speaking of what comes next.
Ma'am, I'm getting something on my terminal here, an AWE alert from Bright Falls, Washington. But it might be a glitch. The date's all wrong, a couple of years in the future.
Yep, that's right. We've come full circle. You see, Alan Wake is incredibly important in the world of Control. Not just because it provided the foundation for everything that made Control one of the best games I played last gen, and not because its events are referenced in a few memos you'll find scattered throughout the FBC, but because the stories of Alan Wake and Jesse Faden are inextricably linked. And they have been all along. Okay, so originally this chapter was a lot longer. I spent a ton of time analysing all of the events of the AWE expansion in detail, putting forward a solid case for why an Alan Wake sequel was where this universe was headed next. It was all written and ready to be recorded, and then Jeffro blew up my spot by revealing that Remedy are working with Epic Games to make Alan Wake 2 their next game. I know, take it with a pinch of salt, it's just rumours, blah blah blah, but look, it's really obvious that our next stop will be Bright Falls. Or, wherever Alan turns up next. AWE is a pretty good expansion in its own right. You beckoned into the investigation sector by Alan Wake, who was seemingly contacting Jesse through the hotline, the same way Trench and the board communicated with her through the main campaign.
Jesse Faden could hear it. A call. It was faint, reaching for her from a dark place. Faden was sensitive to visitations. She had them all the time. From her guiding star and the previous director. She was the perfect receiver. As if she'd been made for this.
Investigations had been sealed off due to a creature getting loose and tearing the place apart. It turns out that that creature is Dr. Emil Hartman, the jackass who ran the clinic in Bright Falls for artists with unique abilities for changing the world around them. Apparently, at some point after the events of Alan Wake, Hartman took a swan dive into Cauldron Lake, which inevitably ended really badly. He was consumed by the darkness and brought to the FBC to be contained. During the events of Control, the Hiss managed to get into the investigation sector and also took over Hartman, creating an unholy combination of darkness and Hiss, or what Wake calls the Third Thing. You travel all the way through the investigation sector trying to take down this Third Thing through a combination of gameplay mechanics from both Alan Wake and Control. There's also a really cool side quest involving a seemingly alien entity with some minor communication issues.
Why are you locked up in here?
Casual turning, back and front, and Gerbil took the top head. Not being pressed for that. Lady going and loosing back for right?
Sorry, I think I'm misunderstanding you.
And you get a truly amazing monologue from Langston, the guy in charge of the Panopticon and my favourite character in the game.
She's probably gonna have to go to the store for more wet food. I'll have to remember to pay her back. Hold on, let me make a note. Pay back Maria for
Alfred's food. Okay. Oh, one more thing.
But what makes the AWE expansion really stand out, and let's be fair, the main thing everyone who's played it has been talking about for months now, is how it ties together the two games and heavily signposts the future of what Remedy director Sam Lake refers to as the Remedy Connected Universe. Throughout the expansion, Jesse catches glimpses of Wake trapped in darkness behind a door in the Ocean View Motel, desperately trying to write his escape from the predicament he found himself in at the conclusion of the game that was named after him. These glimpses show a few interesting things, the main one being the implication that his writing is responsible for the events of Control, the Hiss invasion, and Jesse's involvement.
Wake needed a hero. A hero needed a crisis. For the part in the story about the government agency, Wake needed something special, something to convey an alien force mimicking human intelligence.
Yeah, that's right. It certainly seems like the events of the main game are a story being written by Wake as the opening chapters of the story that will eventually save him. As you might remember if you played Alan Wake, he can't simply write whatever he wants. His stories need to follow a traditional narrative structure and make sense for them to affect reality. He needs a hero, one powerful enough to take on the darkness and get him the hell out of the ocean he's trapped. And that hero needs a motivation to come and help him. And there's not much of a better motivation for said hero than to be in charge of an entire government agency dedicated to dealing with the exact type of paranormal situation that took place during the events of Alan Wake. And so, he arranges the final pieces on the metaphorical chessboard, and the expansion, and presumably the entire game, comes to an end. And we get this.
Ma'am, I'm getting something on my terminal here, an AWE alert from Bright Falls, Washington. But it might be a glitch. The date's all wrong, a couple of years in the future.
Things set in motion. If the alarm's true, then so is the reason for the alarm. The effect must follow the cause. It's happening again. A return. You have been warned.
How much of the events of Control Wake is directly responsible for is ambiguous. Whether everything from the Bureau to Jesse herself is a concoction of Wake's fiction, or he simply took advantage of Jesse's personal mission and a Bureau that already existed, well, that's probably a question we'll have to wait a couple of years to get the answers to. What really matters is that the future of Control is also the future of Alan Wake. There's no separating the two. It seems like these two worlds are about to collide in spectacular fashion. And for someone like myself, who loved Alan Wake and considers Control one of the best games of last gen, it's like a dream come true.
Yeah, you think there's a dog buried in this? I can tell you are not yesterday's Krause's son.
It's really hard to write a conclusion that sums up my feelings on Control better than I just did in the last sentence of that previous chapter. Control is amazing, and it's probably one of my favourite games of the last gen. I could probably make a video that's double the length of whatever this turned out to be. Cut a lot out of this. My theory crafting on the themes, metaphors, and events of the game. My short section about Dr. Underhill, my favourite character in the game.
Take a mystery pill because a rude lady in a hazmat suit tells you to. Great idea, Jesse.
Oh, honestly, did you want me to wrap it in cheese?
A lot of waffle about Alan Wake. Everything about the Foundation expansion, an entire separate chapter, and so much more. I mean, at one point, there were like 3 full paragraphs discussing the font they used in the game. The font. But I decided just to focus on what I considered to be truly exceptional. It turns out there was still a lot of that, because Control is a truly exceptional game. If you haven't played it, sorry, I basically ruined the entire narrative and a lot of the cool surprises and best moments, but this is a deep dive retrospective that's looking to be even longer than my Bloodborne video, so who's to blame, really? Wait, is that really the last line of this conclusion? No, that can't be it, surely. There has to be a better way to wrap this video up than that.
Nobody knew her name, but she turned out
insane. There was a knock on the door, a thump on the floor, and the party turned insane as she called out her name. And she walked in looking like dynamite. She said, now come along and boogaloo through the night. And by the way she's moving, well, dynamite, might she not? With all she's got the whole town lighting up dynamite. Nobody quite knowing what to do, wrong or right, but they all know Jessie is dynamite. They're right.
I've watched that video like 100 times while I've been making this video, and I love it so much. Like, it's never going to get old for me. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this video. If you watched it all the way through, I put a lot of work into it, as I do with all my retrospectives, and it's always great to know that people watch them and hopefully enjoy them. Before I get into the rankings and whatnot, I do need to give out a few shout-outs. Thanks to everyone who recorded voiceover for this video. Luna over at twitch.tv/LunaMothwings, Elfie, who is at twitch.tv/elf.acraft, Tori, my good friend Tori. If I've missed anyone, it's because I'm recording this and will have edited it before I actually get all of the voiceover back. So hopefully I haven't missed anyone, but if I have, I'll make it up to you in the next video. Huge thanks again as well to Elfie and Tori, as well as Moody and Phil, for checking out bits and pieces of this video while I was making it, and giving me feedback, and more importantly, encouragement that I'm not wasting my life. So to the ranking, this is a thing I've decided to do at the end of all of my retrospectives, just to make a fun little list of all the games that I play, and rank them in the order of how much I enjoyed them. There aren't any bad games on this list. Well, I didn't really like Resident Evil 3 2020 all that much. But, you know, I don't intend to make retrospectives of games I don't like. So, like, despite the fact that, like, it's a ranked list, like, all of the games on this list are ones that I like. Just like some of them a little bit more than others. I'm actually going to put Control here. I love Bloodborne, I really do. But I also love Control, for very different reasons. Bloodborne is an amazingly impeccable gameplay experience. Control just has this world that I just want to explore for forever. And you know, I'm not going to compare the two games, because comparing any two games is like apples and oranges, and I just did a massively long video about Control, so why would I rehash the points there? I'm going to stop talking now. So for the next video, I did a Twitter poll, and Dishonored won, in no small part thanks to Luna and Tejan, encouraging a lot of people to vote for it, which probably won't be out for a little while. Again, Dishonored is not a short game, but also there's a lot of cool games coming out at the moment, and also I'm addicted to Monster Hunter Rise, which literally delayed this video from the time that I had in my head of when I wanted to publish it. And instead I played a shitload of Monster Hunter. But I'm going to try and fill in the space between Control retrospective and a Dishonored retrospective with some shorter essays. Like I did a Hades video a little while back, which was quite popular. So I plan on doing that with a couple of other things that I've had on my mind. I've already got 2 essays written out, and I've got an outline and a little bit of writing for a third one. So I'll have plenty of content. I hate using that word. Content. To choose from. Dishonored, however many years later. It was 2012, wasn't it? So, like Dishonored 9 years later will be the next video. I also don't know if I'm going to be able to just do Dishonored 1 without doing Dishonored 2. So if you voted for Dishonored in the poll, you might have inadvertently voted for 2 videos instead of 1. So I guess you're going to get your votes with. So thanks for that. It's fine. It'll be fine. What's 2 videos instead of what? It's fine. So I'm going to go and play video games and talk about them. Have an amazing day, night, afternoon. Bye.